Okay, so this is going to be, I believe, our third video on Billy Budd. We're going to be looking at a few chapters, starting with chapter 23. And we'll still be doing another video, one more to deal with the ending. We're going to be looking at the chapters that lead up to Billy's actual death. Okay, and then I'll be doing one more video dealing with the last couple of chapters that deal with the aftermath. You hopefully have finished Billy Budd by now. We are going to have one more week. If you have finished it, it'll give you an opportunity to perhaps look over some of the chapters as we go into next week. But you should also be thinking about starting the James Joyce. And remember, we're starting with the short story called The Dead. It's a fairly lengthy short story, so you do get a start on that. A reminder, we have our virtual class tomorrow. I sent out a notice reminding you that we're starting it at 10. It will be available automatically on Omnivox starting at 8:30, but we're going to start it at 10. And remember, they usually last about an hour to an hour and a half. We see how it goes. It depends on you guys. So do please try to attend, and do please bring any questions and concerns you have. I will also be discussing your midterm tomorrow at that virtual class, and I will be posting the questions for the midterm exam tomorrow. You will have 2 weeks from tomorrow to write the essay. All right, you'll have a choice, and again, we'll go into the details of that tomorrow. Be on the lookout as well. I will be posting some material on essay writing. Okay, things dealing with structure, thesis statements, things like that. That should be going up again either tonight or tomorrow, and I will try to get a video where I will go over those documents on the video in detail as a means to prepare you for the essay that you're going to be writing. You have 2 weeks, so keep that in mind, that if you have questions or concerns, you can contact me. I can take a look at your thesis statement or look at your outline, things like that, to help guide you as you're writing the essay. You have the 2 weeks, so you have time to do the outline. Please do. As well as to do revisions, 2 or 3 drafts, etc. All right. I think that takes care of that business. So let's get into Billy Budd. Chapter 3, reminder that we saw that, whoops, hold on. It would help if I were to get it up on the screen. And where is it? Sorry. Huh. I got the PowerPoint here. There's the PowerPoint. I can't seem to find the text. Hold on. Let me see where it could be. All right. Well, remember, there is the PowerPoint on Billy Budd, which again I suggest very strongly that you look at on a regular basis. It has the themes, reminding the characters, and so on. That's been posted for a little while. And let me just see. Okay, so it's that. All right, let's see if I can find it again. Sorry about that. There it is. Okay. All right, so chapter 23. What we have here, again, brief chapter, but we're dealing now when Captain Vere is going to go see Billy and tell Billy what's transpired. Remember, we've had the trial, found guilty, sentenced to death. All right. All this happening very fast. Billy, who's been sequestered to this point, is now visited by Captain Vere. Note here, what's an interesting point here is what we see at the beginning, is that the narrator has to speculate as to what transpired in the private meeting between Captain Vere and Billy Budd. All right, we've talked a bit about the narrator. Remember, we have a narrator that works like a character in this story. So he does things like this where he speculates, and he interprets and he gives his opinions, which we have to take with a certain grain of salt. Remember, the narrator is not the author. The narrator is not Herman Melville. The narrator is a character. We've talked about this in the past, and we see this quite evident in this brief chapter. Beyond the communication of the sentence which took place in the interview took place at this interview was never known. But in view of the character of the twain briefly closeted in the stateroom, each radically sharing in the rarer qualities of our nature, right? This is the narrator telling us, to remind us of the particular qualities, the qualities in terms of the human nature of these two, Captain Vere and Billy Budd. And we've talked a lot about their character. So rare indeed, etc. But some conjectures must be ventured. What he's saying here is I am speculating as to what the conversation was like when the two of them met. We do not have an omniscient narrator here who knows everything. Right? So that does, it's a bit problematic at times because we don't know how much we can trust the narrator, but it's all we have to work with. So we have to deal with what the narrator is telling us, but keep it in mind. Okay, it would have been in consonance with the spirit of Captain Vere should he, on this occasion, have concealed nothing from the condemned one. Okay, so what this is saying is Captain Vere is going to be straight up and honest, and that fits with the character of Captain Vere as we come to understand it. He's going to tell Billy everything. Disclose to him the part he himself had played in bringing about this decision. Remember, it's Captain Vere, even though he wasn't technically one of the judges at the court, but it's Captain Vere who made the case that we looked at very closely in the last video, who made the case that this is what we have to do, knowing that Billy's character, this was not intentional. The circumstances being what they were, but remember, he made his case, and it was very much touching on that idea of the individuality versus society, that under these circumstances, in this context, this is what has to be done. And the only thing that matters is he struck a superior officer, and that superior officer died. Everything that surrounds that, which in the individual world, in the world outside of this context, all those other factors would have come into play. But not here. Remember, he's not even willing to wait and take him back to the fleet and have the higher authorities look into the case. We have to settle this now. He rationalized it. He's not doing it out of meanness. He's doing it out of what he perceives to be the necessity in a military environment, in a war environment. Concealed nothing from the condemned one, told him about what his part, that he was an advocate for this decision, and the motives that were involved. Indeed, he might have appreciated the brave opinion of him implied in his captain making such a confidant of him. Where the speculation here is, once this is revealed and Captain Vere is honest, how does Billy respond? And he would have responded in this meeting to Captain Vere as admiring him and being happy that the captain is willing to be so intimate with him, so to speak, that he's going to be honest with him and actually come and meet with him one-on-one. Okay. No, as a sense of self, he could have been sensible that it was imparted to him that as to one not afraid to die. Right. The sense here is, how is Billy going to react to being told he's about to be executed? And we're already hinting this is going to be elaborated upon to a greater extent as we continue through these chapters about Billy's attitude towards death. Okay, Captain Veer in the end may have developed a passion sometimes latent under an exterior stoical or indifferent, suggesting that this might have been emotional. To emphasize that kind of emotional interaction between the two of them, he was old enough to have been Billy's father, as suggesting a bit of a father-son relationship here in this meeting. An austere devotee of military duty, letting himself melt back into what remains primeval in our formalized humanity, may in the end have caught Billy to his heart, even as Abraham may have caught young Isaac on the brink of resolutely offering him up in obedience to the exacting behest. So what this is saying is that that veneer that Captain Veer puts on as a military man, you know, that whole courtroom scene. Here, when it's one-on-one with Billy, melts back into that form, that sense of humanity. This is where he doesn't have to have necessarily that strict military attitude. Here is where he can be more human. Again, looking at that conflict between the individual humanity versus the demands of society and societal obligation. And the reference here is to the story of Abraham and Isaac, where God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And so we're again having these biblical references, which we've seen many of in the story. And of course, the analogy here would be the Captain Veer is Abraham taking his son Isaac, Billy, for execution. Of course, in that story, it ends differently. Nonetheless, it is reminding us of this, the symbolic references, if you will, to the Bible. We've seen it to a lot of different areas involving mythology and so on. But now we're getting much more, very much into the biblical references. Okay? And here, two of great nature's nobler order embrace. All right, so it's really complementary, if you will, of the nature of Billy's nature, the innocence of Billy. Remember, it's reference to him as an Adam before the fall. It's important to remember that the Adam reference has been a reference to Adam before the fall, before the eating of the forbidden fruit. Okay, before all that transpired and they were cast out of the Garden of Eden, in that pure, utterly and totally pure essence of the pre-fall Adam in the Garden of Eden, and his nature. And a little more complicated unpacking Captain Veer's nature, but we've seen he's a good man who is making decisions that are very much predicated on the context. All right, I mean, this is again what the story is so concerned with. The face he beheld for the moment, one expressive of the agony of the strong, was okay. So what we have here is the first encounter Captain Veer in act of leaving the compartment was the senior lieutenant, and the senior lieutenant, the face he beheld, Captain Veer's face, for the moment, one expressive of the agony of the strong. This hasn't been easy for Captain Veer, clearly. Was to that officer, though a man of 50, startling revelation that the condemned one, Billy, suffered less than he who mainly had affected the condemnation, Captain Veer, was apparently indicated by the former's exclamation in the scene, soon perforce to be touched upon. What's that? It's telling us that Captain Veer is suffering more in certain respects than Billy, which seems a bit odd, of course, but this is what we need to unpack at this stage. And we're going to see how Billy is reacting to everything and how Captain Veer reacts. We're going to particularly see the Captain Veer when we look in the next video at the final chapters. But let's continue at this point as we are looking at the progression of events and so on. Interesting point here, right? Between the entrance into the cabin of him who never left it alive and him who, when he did leave it, left it as one condemned to die. So between the time that Claggart and Billy had their confrontation, less than an hour and a half had elapsed. So everything's from the moment that Billy has killed Claggart to this moment now when Captain Vere has come in to speak with Billy, it's only been an hour and a half. Remember, the thinking was we're going to move very quickly with this so that we get this out of the way. We have a crew to deal with. We're not sure how they're going to react. We can't let this linger. We have to resolve this as quickly as possible. The next part here is dealing with how the crew is responding, and that there was rumors. People had seen them go in, didn't see them come out. Neither of them had been seen to emerge. So obviously the crew is talking. And the response of the crew becomes important. Remember, we know how the crew feels about Billy. We know how Captain Vere feels about Billy. We know how everyone here feels about Billy. I mean, that's part of the great tension here, if you will, tension of sorts. People of a great warship being, in one respect, like villagers taking microscopic note of every outward movement or non-movement going on. All right, like villagers, this comes back again to the idea of a society, right? The society versus the individual, right? And this is a microcosmic view of a society, but a society in a particular situation, the situation of war, okay? But it's still feeding off of that duality of the individual and society and the conflict between the two. So because of these rumors and because of the talk that was going, the crew were not wholly unprepared for some extraordinary announcement, okay? So they're all called to meet. We have a description of where they are. It's on the deck. Captain Vere, standing in his place, surrounded by all the wardroom officers, addresses his men. Again, this is happening an hour and a half after the killing. Note, he takes his supreme position aboard his own ship. Right? Very important to understand this dynamic of this particular society with a supreme leader, if you will. Right? The ultimate authority here is Captain Vere. Okay, he has to take the responsibility for what transpires on his ship. In clear terms and concise, he told them what had taken place in the cabin, that the master of arms was dead, that he who had killed him had been already tried by a summary court and condemned to death, and that the execution would take place in the early morning watch. He's being transparent. And again, what he's revealing to them are the most basic and fundamental facts. Remember the argument that Captain Vere was making when he was discussing this with the jury. A sailor struck a superior officer, killing him. There is only one, if those are the only parameters we have, if those are the only things that are being considered, there can only be one outcome, which is being condemned to death. It's noted here that the word mutiny was not named, all right? There's no enhancement beyond the facts, okay? You don't want to talk about more than those facts, because then other things will be discussed, which could then translate into some kind of rebellious attitude among the crew. This is, again, the reason let's do this quickly. Because remember, we're always in the context of not just the war, but those mutinies that we were told of in detail in the early chapters. Okay? So he refrained of talking about any of those issues, and moves directly to, this is what's happening, and it's going to happen early tomorrow morning. The captain's announcement was listened to by a throng of standing sailors in a dumbness Okay, so there again, the dumbness is referencing to is Billy. You know, they have to be speculating, well, why did this happen? What transpired? But also like that of a seated congregation of believers in hell. Okay, so what that's bringing in is it's bringing in the religious church imagery and incorporating this particular society within those parameters. And we're going to see much more of that when we get into the chapter dealing with the chaplain. Okay. We have here what happens to Claggart. Very quickly, he was buried. But note, the Master at Arms was committed to the sea with every funeral honor properly belonging to his naval grade. So the whole thing is being treated based on just those facts. So Claggart there's no discussion with the crew or anyone at this point about Claggart's accusations. We know a lot about Claggart because we've seen things, but none of this is discussed. And he is buried with full honors. All right, so everything is constructed in this scenario as a simple as the word, I suppose, simple matter of a sailor struck a superior officer. That's it, that's all. Of course, we know all this other stuff. And Captain Vere knows all this other stuff. And the crew knows all this other stuff. But the way that it's being processed and carried out has to ignore that in order to do what's best for this particular society. All communication between Captain Vere and the condemned one ended with the closet interview already given, right? That's it. They had their moment. The narrator has told us what he believes transpired in that moment, and it's reasonable deduction given what we know about the two characters. And now Captain Vere has nothing more to do with Billy. It's an ordinary routine preliminary to the end. This is everything is being done by the book at this point. Okay, effected without unusual precautions. They're trying to treat this. Captain Vere is insistent that this is just going to be done in a normal manner, even though it's extraordinary circumstances. Again, pushing away all those elements of our individual ability to judge, to reflect, to speculate. All that has to be eliminated. And we have to move just very precisely in this, in carrying this out and resolving it as quickly as possible. To let the men, not let the men so much as surmise that their officers anticipate aught amiss from them is the tacit rule in a military ship. The officers, remember the judges and the others, they know much more, but it is, they cannot allow anything to be seemingly amiss, because that has the potential of inciting the villagers, the sailors, and this is the one thing that cannot be allowed. And again, very much because of what we know about the mutinies and the situation of the war and so on. Officers keep that apprehension to themselves. Everything's going by the book. We move into the next chapter. Now we're going to get see Billy and how Billy is dealing with this waiting period now before he's to be executed. Behold Billy Budd under sentry, lying prone in irons in one of the bays formed by the regular spacing of the guns comprising the batteries on either side. So what do we, note the setting. Again, Billy as a representation of this pure innocence. Okay, this if you want, pre-religious type of innocence. We'll see here referred to, the term that's used here is barbarian in the sense that is not influenced by the specifics of a Western culture. We'll come to that. It'll be a little clearer as we go along. And he's sitting, and here he is, this pure innocence, but he's in the space between guns. Okay, always reminding us of the context in which this is transpiring. Here's Billy, and we're going to see he's all in white in this very dark, black area surrounded with guns, and how he contrasts with that, right? Everything is painted black, we see here. And in contrast with this funereal hue, right, these very dark, militaristic surroundings, the prone sailor's exterior apparel, white jumper and white duck trousers. So remember, we always pay attention to colors. Here we're having the starkest of contrasts. Billy's whiteness, the whiteness representing that innocence, in this dark, militaristic surroundings. Okay, but now, I mean, it's a stark and quite explicit image that this conveys as he's waiting for his execution, suggesting he is already in his shroud or the garments that shall serve him in lieu of one. Okay, it's his funeral shroud. It's white. It's innocence. It's purity. Right, Billy as a representative of that. Two battle lanterns swing from two massive beams above deck. So we're getting all this imagery of light and dark, okay, and how this plays off of Billy's character. With flickering splashes of dirty yellow light, they pollute the pale moonshine. So now we're getting the moonshine that would be more pure, more of nature, with these oil supplied, these battle lanterns and so on. Not just lanterns, battle lanterns, guns, right? Again, speaking to that contrast between this pure individuality and the extremity of societal restrictions, war. Okay, not just war, but war on a ship where you're utterly isolated. Okay. Other lanterns at intervals serve but to bring out somewhat the obscure bays, which like small confessionals or side chapels in a cathedral, more of this church imagery. Okay, we're seeing this now becoming much more pronounced. All right, I mean, because we're coming to this moment of death. Okay, such was the deck where now lay the handsome sailor. But now, lying between the two guns, as nipped in the vice of fate, okay, again, the concept of fate here, you know, what was this fated to be? It's one of the questions we can be asking. The sequence of events that led to Billy being into this situation, how much control did Billy have over this? Okay, and if he didn't have the control, is that all because Claggart manipulated the situation? But it certainly didn't go the way Claggart was trying to manipulate it to go. We'll never know what Claggart's endgame was. Remember, no one knows what his endgame was. Even when he makes the accusation to Captain Vere is saying, "Where's your evidence? Where's your proof?" And Claggart says, "I'll have that for you." Where is he going to get that? We don't know. It's never revealed to us. Seemingly not important. Billy's agony, mainly proceeding from a generous young heart's virgin experience of the diabolical incarnate and effective in some men, the tension of that agony was over now. Okay? This is what is. Billy is now coming to terms with the situation. How is he going to handle this? I mean, think about it. I mean, think about what Billy must be going through. I mean, I don't think there's any way that anyone could accept that Billy deserves the punishment he's about to receive outside of this context, which was so aptly argued by Veer. And even that, we can question that. There's a logic to Veer's argument as to why the guilt, we have to carry this out to its ultimate end, and that the jury does agree with him. But we know that Billy is not an evil, bad person. But it's, we have all this imagery of his innocence, but don't forget that Billy has also lied. Remember, when he was asked, did he hear anything rumblings about any kind of mutiny? He chose to say no, he hasn't, when he had. Just a little bit of there, that the purity is not perhaps this 100% purity. There's times when we're meant to question that a bit. Without movement, he lay as in a trance. Adolescent expression. Remember, it's baby Billy. Taking on something akin to the look of a slumbering child in the cradle. Right? We haven't seen him referred to as baby Billy. All right, the Dankster was the one who was calling him that. We haven't seen the Dankster here, noticeably, right? His one confidant, the one who warned him, the worldly sailor who saw what Claggart was up to. The trance, a serene, happy light born of some wandering remnants or dream would diffuse itself over his face and then wane away, only anew to return. Happy light born of some wandering reminiscence of or dream. Okay, so it's becoming somewhat ephemeral, if you will. It's luminescent. Right? These descriptions of Billy. And it is meant to now take us away from the literal and into the figurative and bring together all these analogies that have been made concerning Billy, and to recognize that this is going well beyond just the realism that we see portrayed in much of this story, and it comes into a transcendent, if you will, idea, and we're seeing this through the imagery of Billy. And notice that is, of course, in contrast to the very rigid approach that Captain Veer took in terms of determining Billy's fate. Very much by the rule, very much grounded in reality. But we're seeing all this we're looking at here is giving us images that really are transcending that to some extent. And of course, it's structurally being composed here to lead to the entrance of the chaplain. So every ship had a chaplain, right? A religious figure on a ship of war. So right away, just the concept of that is a bit odd, right? There has to be a conflict between the teachings of religion and an environment that is revolving around battle and death. The chaplain comes to see him, attentively regarded him for a space, then slipping aside, withdrew for the time. The chaplain is the only one who can come to see Billy, right? The captain could, but Captain Veer doesn't. Peradventure, feeling that even he, the chaplain, the minister of Christ, though receiving his stipend from Mars is the god of war. So he's a minister of Christ and all the teachings of Christ, but he's in the employ of the god of war because he's a chaplain on a warship. Had no consolation to proffer which could result in a peace transcending that which he behold. The chaplain walks in and he sees this image. He sees Billy in the way that we've been seeing him described here. And he says, there's nothing I can do here to bring some kind of solace or peace to this condemned man that will come close to the peace that I see in his face and in his figure right now. He leaves, he comes back again. And Billy now notices him, all but cheerfully welcomed him. But it was to little purpose that in the interview following, the good man sought to bring Billy Budd to some godly understanding that he must die and at dawn. Now, this is a pivotal scene. Because again, if we're looking at Billy as this pre-fall Adam, and we've seen references that are suggesting he's a Christ-like figure. We're never told exactly. These are all hinted at. But here comes the chaplain who is going to discuss death with the condemned prisoner and salvation and forgiveness, all these things that would normally happen here. The interview following, a good man sought to bring Billy Budd to some godly understanding that he must die and at dawn. True, Billy himself freely referred to his death as a thing close at hand. Billy's aware he's going to die. But it was something in the way that children will refer to death in general, who yet among their other sports will play a funeral with hearse and mourners. So the chaplain is like navigating through this attitude that Billy has, is I know I'm going to die. But he seemingly is treating it as a child would, that it's not seemingly real. Now, on the one hand, we could be looking at this and saying to ourselves, well, this is baby Billy. He doesn't really realize what's going on. But of course he does. We've seen other incidents. He's aware. It's, again, we're looking at a character that we can't put our finger on exactly what he is. It's easy to dismiss him as, as just a child. But we've seen he's hardly a child. He's killed a man. He has been prone to violent acts. He purposely doesn't reveal that he has been approached for mutiny because he doesn't want to be a traitor. It seems everything that we've been seeing would suggest strongly that it's not just a immaturity. It's something beyond that doesn't allow Billy to necessarily be able, as an adult, conceive of the negative in the same way. Keep that in mind as we continue here, and we'll try to unpack that a little bit. Not that, like children, Billy was incapable of conceiving what death really is. No, but he was wholly without irrational fear of it. A fear more prevalent in highly civilized communities than those so-called barbarous ones, which in all respects stand nearer to unadulterate nature. A barbarian Billy radically was. Now this is, it's a little complex, but what it is suggesting is that our civilization and society, as amplified in the ship, as the warship, as a society in this context, a civilized society, right? The Western civilized society. Within that, as that society, we see down here, there's references to the Roman Empire and so on. Within that civilized society, concepts such as philosophy and religion and theology have developed a sensibility that has made us, as part of that society, more fearful and more fearful of death, but more than that, more concerned with that death as something outside what we know. This passage here with barbarian Billy as a barbarous, and relating him to the barbarous ones who have a greater affinity as a culture to nature and the natural cycles, where death is more acceptable as a part of life than it is within civilized societies that puts more emphasis on other things, things other than the natural progression of living things, which is part of that is the death. Okay, so it's a little bit of a complicated concept, but that's what's going. This is what the narrator is inferring in this, identifying Billy with as a barbarian. It's not in a negative way, and the term barbarian usually has negative connotations, but as someone who is outside of this constructed civilization that is the society, as exemplified most particularly on The Indomitable. Important to remember, because this will speak back to a bit of the reference to Billy as an Adam before the fall, because once the fall, then sin and theology and religion then starts dominating how we see this constructed idea of life. Billy seems to be so pure, he goes beyond or before religion. And as such, it's not a fear or a seeking out of death. It's more of an acceptance of it as part of a natural. Remember how many often we see the word natural there? An acceptance of a natural cycle of life. And again, this is dealing with how barbarians have been perceived in the past, whom the Pope of that time, admiring the strangeness of their personal beauty, would refer to them as angels, meaning English in the modern word. Angels do you call them, and it is because they look so like angels. Again, it's how this civilization would look at the so-called barbarians and see a certain level of purity that is often dismissed as naivete. Innocence that goes beyond just being innocent into this idea of you just don't understand. Because if you understood what we understand as a civilized society, right, then you'd be terrified. You'd be terrified that you're not going to be saved. You'd be terrified of death because you're not sure whether or not you're going to go to heaven. Billy isn't engaged in that. What will be, will be. The good chaplain sought to impress the young barbarian with ideas of death akin to those conveyed in the skull, dial, and crossbones on old tombstones. Equally futile to all appearance were his efforts to bring home to him the thought of salvation and a savior. These are not issues that impact Billy, because these are issues that are part of this particular society, the Western society, if you will. This is the society of chaplains, warships, all those things that come with the history of England and the history of Western civilization. Billy is beyond that, or below that, or transcends that. That's what's being suggested here. That he's not going to be able to get to him through salvation and the Savior, Jesus or whoever this, it's not going to resonate with Billy because it doesn't matter to Billy. Again, which can also tie into this idea of Adam before the fall, before there was all this. Billy just listens out of a certain natural politeness. And this sailor way of taking clerical discourse is not wholly unlike the way in which a pioneer of Christianity full transcendent miracles was received long ago. And okay, so now it's delving into it's delving into how the impact of Christianity, if you will, Um, deals with transcendent miracles through Christ, the raising of the dead, etc. But how this, again, out of natural courtesy he received, but did not appropriate. It doesn't mean anything. He's these stories out of the Bible, these ideas of Christianity, these myths, if you will, however you want to look at them, they're not relevant because they're not able, as stories, as narratives from the Bible, able to really touch on the purity of understanding that Billy has. Okay, I know that, again, this is a little tough to grasp, and we're going to deal with that because we're going to see when we get towards the end as well. This is going to come back again. It's going to be, I think, brought out and a little more approachable as we continue. But the Indomitable chaplain was a discreet man possessing the good sense of a good heart, so he insisted not in his vocation here. At the instance of Captain Beer, Lieutenant had apprised him of pretty much everything as to Billy, and since he felt that innocence, and here's the chaplain, innocence was even a better thing than religion, wherewith to go to judgment, he would reluctantly withdrew. So the chaplain even recognizes that the innocence and how that innocence that Billy has allows him to deal with his predicament. It allows him to deal with this judgment, to go to judgment, judgment day, judgment at death, that this innocence that Billy possesses is a better way to meet that judgment than even his religion. It's quite a statement that it's coming from the chaplain. And what does the chaplain do in this extraordinary scene? But in his emotion, not without first performing an act strange enough in an Englishman, and under the circumstances yet more so in any regular priest, stooping over, he kissed on the fair cheek his fellow man, a felon in martial law. Billy's about to be executed for murder. One who, though on the confines of death, he felt he could never convert to a dogma, the dogma of Christianity. Billy's never going to get it. He's not capable. His purity doesn't allow him to latch on to those things related to the Christian dogma. Nor for all that did he fear for his future. Chaplain recognizes something. Marvel not at having been made acquainted with the young sailor's essential innocence, an eruption of heretic thought hard to suppress because it is heretical. It is what Billy is representing here goes contrary to Christian dogma. It's mentioned there. Bluntly put, a chaplain is the minister, and again, it's speaking a lot to the chaplain, but it's talking on a broader picture of the irony, if you will, of having a chaplain on a warship. And how do we reconcile the teachings of the church in a society that is so full of violence and sinful, if you will? But you say it's sinful because it's outside of the context of religion. Bluntly put, a chaplain is the minister of the Prince of Peace, serving in the host of the god of war, Mars. He's the chaplain, as a representative of Jesus, is a minister of the Prince of Peace, Jesus. But he serves in the host of a god of war. Seems like irreconcilable differences there. As such, he is as incongruous as a musket would be on the altar at Christmas. Having a chaplain on a warship is as absurd, what we're seeing here from our narrator, as putting a gun on a Christmas altar. Why then is he there? Because he indirectly subserves the purpose attested by the canon. Because 2, he lends the sanction of the religion of the meek to that which practically is the abrogation of everything but brute force. It's a means by which to legitimize the things that are going on that seemingly are illegitimate within the theological understanding of the religion. And it's problematic. It's contradictory. Just as everything in this story has these dualities and these conflicts, trying to peel away to get a better understanding of human nature, if nothing else. And we see nature and human nature brought up here all the time. And how do we unpack that? How do we understand it? Look at Captain Vere. We're going to see Captain Vere in the next video, and we're going to see a bit of it here. Captain Vere, who is seemingly heartbroken that Billy's going to be executed, yet he insists on it to a large degree. The sacrifice that purity and that innocence for the society, but the society is a society of war. How is that reconcilable? Oh, I didn't highlight this section yet. All right, well, let's quickly, this is the last little bit we're going to look at, and this is Billy's death. The night so luminous on the spar deck, the luminous light pass away. Be attentive to the imagery of light. But like the prophet in a chariot disappearing in heaven and dropping his mantle. Alicia, I'm going to go through this very quickly. We can maybe return to this as a way to transition into the final video. The important thing here is it's 8 bells, all right? It's time for the execution. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Up through the great Hatter, rim, the racks, a heavy shot, the watch became. Everyone's coming out on the deck to witness this, okay? And again, they all know who Billy is. All kinds are showing up, different groups. Everyone's here. No one, man or boy, none spake but to whisper, and few spake at all. Captain Vere, as before, the central figure among the commission officers, stood high in the beak of the poop deck, facing forward, just below him on the quarter deck. Okay, so we're getting the scene, this momentous, how we see this image in relation to religious imagery. I mean, it's there. At sea in the old time, the execution by halter of a military who was generally from the foreyard. Here, it's in the main yard. It's different places. It was noted at the time and remarked upon afterwards that in his final scene, the good man evinced little or nothing. I'm going to try to get to the end here because I went much longer than I planned. Brief speech indeed he had with the condemned one, but the genuine gospel was less on his tongue than in the aspect and manner towards him. The final preparations personal to the latter were speedily brought to an end. Okay, so again, I'm just going to look at this. Under the arm at the lee yard, the prisoner was presently brought up, the chaplain attending him. That in this final scene, the good man, in his little or nothing of the perfunctory, brief speech indeed he had with the condemned one, the chaplain, but the genuine gospel, like the gospel, the word of God, the good news, was less on his tongue than in the aspect and the manner towards him. It's really challenging in many ways how religion and the concept of salvation works. Okay, Billy stood facing aft. At the moment, and this is again key, and this is what I wanted to get to most importantly here. Right before his death, his words, and the only ones, words wholly unobstructed in an utterance were these: God bless Captain Vere. What do we make of that? We know they had their meeting together. Captain Vere was presumably open and honest with them. Captain Vere explained to him why he has to die. And not only is Billy accepting of this, but he blesses Captain Vere. Syllable so unanticipated, coming from one with the ignominious hemp around his neck. He's got the rope around his neck. He's about to be hung. Syllables too delivered in the clear melody of a singing bird on the point of launching from the twig. Had a phenomenal effect, not unenhanced by the rare personal beauty of the young sailor, spiritualized now through late experience and employment profound. I mean, we're getting quite an image here. Billy all in white, being brought out to be hung. The silence of all the sailors staring up at him. The captain, Captain Vere, up on in his place of supreme authority. And Billy says, "God bless Captain Vere." And then the ship's population, the populace of the ship, with one voice from alow to aloft, came a resonant, sympathetic echo. God bless Captain Vere. And yet, at that instant, Billy alone must have been in their hearts, even as he was in their eyes. Yes, but what is that telling us about this relationship between Billy and Captain Vere? Right? There's some kind of fusion almost, it seems, of sorts. Billy alone is in their hearts. And yes, Billy's the one who said, God bless Captain Vere. And yet they're still mentioning Captain Vere by name. It seems to be suggesting that Captain Vere did the right thing, that it was an act of not just justice, but something beyond that. At the pronounced words and the spontaneous echo of voluminous rebounded them, Captain Vere, either through stoic self-control or a sort of momentary paralysis induced by emotional shock, stood erectly rigid as a musket in the ship armor's rack. Is it stoic self-control or is it momentary paralysis? The entire crew just said, God bless Captain Vere. And Captain Vere knows that he was the one who argued most deliberately for this execution. At the same moment, it chanced that the vapory fleece hanging low in the east was shot through with a soft glory as of the fleece of the Lamb of God, seen in a mystical vision. Watched by the wedged mass of upturned faces, Billy ascended, and ascending, took the full rose of the dawn. Keep that line in mind. Billy ascended. Okay, now again, it's not clear. We have the Lamb of God. This is all Christian imagery. And yet we saw how the chaplain responded to him, how he seemed to be beyond the limits of Christian interpretation. And the pinioned figure arrived at the yard end. To the wonder of all, no motion was apparent, none save that created by the ship's motion. In moderate weather so majestic, in a great ship ponderously cannoned. The wonder of no motion. When Billy is hung, his body doesn't move, which is extraordinarily unusual. It's again invoking in us this idea of what is Billy? Because at this point, he seems less, I'm not sure he seems beyond human. The imagery is suggesting all this religious Christian idea We have the Jesus references. We have the Adam before the fall references. But we don't have anything telling us exactly. We don't know. But it's something out of the ordinary. It's something extraordinary. Right down to what he says, his last words is, God bless Captain Vere. What are we to make of that? Well, that's what we're going to look at. We'll look at it some tomorrow a bit. We'll go over this again a bit tomorrow. I want to make sure that this is clear before we move on to those final chapters, where we're going to be looking to see if we can get a handle on this, because what just happened here? We know the things that transpire in a factual, realistic way. Billy smacked Claggart, killed Claggart. But now we've been brought into, in Billy's death, something that is transcendent in some way, with a lot of suggestions. It could be a little this, it could be a little that, but we're not told what. We're going to think that over in relation to all the other things we've talked about in this story. Okay, again, from the individual versus society, the concept of the barbarian. Remember when the handsome sailor, when we're first told about what a handsome sailor is back in one of the early chapters, the narrator describes a handsome sailor. He refers to someone who is seemingly attired and looking barbaric. He uses the word barbaric back then. Something alien. Alien to this particular society. Okay, this English, Christian-dominated, so-called cultured society. We're going to probably have to look back at that and see how that was a bit of foreshadowing as to what we see now that Billy actually is. Or I shouldn't say actually is. We don't know what he is. We're trying to figure out, we're trying to try and get some kind of a grasp on what he could be or what he could represent. And what it's saying between him and Captain Vere and Claggart. Remember, good and evil. We've been talking about the good and evil here. But we've gone beyond that now. And we have to start unpacking that. And then we've gone beyond that because the good and evil so easily represented at the beginning by Claggart and Billy. But now Captain Vere's come into play. And it's problematizing these things. So think about that. If you haven't finished, by all means, please do as quickly as you can. We will be finishing up next week. But if you have finished, perhaps reread the last few chapters. It's only 10 pages. And if you haven't read it yet, please do. But keep these things in mind and look for some kind of, not resolution. I don't think we get any resolution here. But something, try to find more of the pieces that interconnect to get a better grasp on what is being commentated on in terms of humanity and human nature and how we function as individuals and as a society, and how we deal with those great unknown concepts of death and salvation. Where we come from, where are we going, all that, all those big questions, which are all being addressed here. Okay, tomorrow, again, remember we are meeting at 10, and I will have your essay questions. I will talk to you about them tomorrow in the class, and then I will be posting them. And keep your eye out for more postings regarding essay writing. And please, tomorrow, bring your questions. Okay, it is a difficult text. We've said that many times, but in many ways it's an extraordinary text, because it forces us to contemplate things from different angles, things that we can all on some level relate to. Okay, so we will see you tomorrow.